Imagine waking up one day and realizing that nearly everything you've said, done, or presented to the world wasn't entirely you. Not a complete fiction, no, it's more subtle. You haven't lived your life as an imposter outright, but as a careful curator, an editor of your own existence. The jokes you share, the clothes you wear, the long pauses before speaking, all were adjusted, polished, strategically placed like pieces in a display case, sculpted to ward off judgment and invite approval. And in that moment of raw clarity, a terrifying question drifts across your mind like smoke. Do people love me, or do they only love the version of me I've allowed them to see? It feels like trying to stare into a mirror covered with 1,000 fingerprints. What stares back is both familiar and alien. Your reflection is yours, but blurred, smudged, tampered with by countless unseen hands: society, culture, family, expectations, comparisons, fears, the sheer machinery of fitting in. The you carry through the world is both performance and prison. Now here's the paradox. We celebrate authenticity as one of the highest virtues. Every motivational quote, every piece of modern wisdom seems to chant the same mantra: be yourself. Yet, in practice, authenticity terrifies us more than almost anything else. Why? Because to be authentic is to stand naked without the armor of expectation. To be authentic is to risk being rejected not for your polished mask, but for your unvarnished truth. And what, after all, could feel more annihilating than that? Pause on this for a moment. Imagine peeling back every social mask and presenting your real self. Your private doubts, your odd impulses, the fragments of you that don't align neatly with polite conversation. Imagine allowing those pieces into the daylight. You risk abandonment, you risk ridicule, you risk the silent judgment behind someone's eyes as they think, oh, so that's who you really are. And if that rejection comes, there's no comforting buffer left. You aren't just told that version of you was disliked. You are told, in essence, that you, at the innermost, most vulnerable level, are unwanted. Isn't it strange that what we most long for, love, intimacy, genuine recognition, requires authenticity, while what we most fear, rejection, humiliation, isolation, also springs from authenticity? The very key to belonging is the same one that could swiftly lock us out. This is authenticity's cruel paradox. The doorway to connection doubles as the edge of a cliff. But here's the unsettling twist. Most people choose the armor. They dress their souls in disguises, carefully calibrated masks. They smile when they don't want to smile. They agree when they silently disagree. And they shrink parts of themselves that don't match the mold. And over time, those masks don't feel like masks anymore. They fuse with the skin. And then quietly, the question arises: who am I underneath it all? But that voice is often silenced or drowned out by the noise of survival. Because here's another truth: life rewards masks. Careers often require them. Dating games encourage them. Social hierarchies practically demand them. Isn't it safer, after all, to be liked for a polished version of yourself than to risk ostracism for the raw, unfiltered one? Still, something gnaws at the edges, a quiet unrest, a subtle dissatisfaction that no amount of external validation entirely resolves. You may receive praise, attention, even success, but a strange hollowness remains. Because deep down you know, they do not love me, they love my representation. And if even love becomes conditional upon performance, then what hope remains for true freedom? To be free is not merely to walk unchained, but to stand unedited. And here lies the real terror. Most of us can't endure the thought of being fully revealed. So we hide, we camouflage, we build castles made of glass. Beautiful on the outside, fragile on the inside. But let's press this deeper, because the problem is not only personal, it is universal, ancient. Philosophers have long wrestled with this tension. Why is truth so unbearable? Why, when stripped of illusion, does raw reality feel so harsh against the skin of the soul? Could it be that the very structures of society depend on our willingness to disguise ourselves, to comply, to sand down our rough edges until we fit neatly into the machinery? And what happens to a person, or a civilization, that slowly loses touch with its own authentic essence? Do we not become hollow shadows, living someone else's script, wondering in some secret chamber of our minds whether we were ever truly alive? The deeper you reflect on this paradox, the more unsettling it becomes. Authenticity is the bridge to meaning, yet also the abyss of fear. We crave it but avoid it. We desire it but sabotage it. And so the question grows sharper, heavier, almost suffocating. What are we more afraid of? That others might never know who we really are, or that they might know exactly and walk away? And here, trembling between these two terrors, the stage is set. Because until we uncover the hidden roots of this fear, until we gaze into the psychological and philosophical shadows where it was born, we will remain prisoners of masks we no longer remember choosing. The hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. To understand why authenticity unsettles us, we must peer into places most people prefer never to look. The inner mechanisms of the human psyche, where shadows dwell and ancient instincts hum like underground machinery. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." He was speaking about the shadow, the hidden repository of all the traits we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves, the impulses too dark, too shameful, too inconvenient for the polished image we present to others. Each time we hide behind a mask, a fragment of this shadow is pushed further underground, and with each fragment suppressed, we grow less connected to the authentic whole of our being. But here lies the paradox again. As much as we long to embrace our authentic nature, the shadow terrifies us. Jung warned that confronting it feels like wrestling with monsters, because authenticity forces us to admit that we are not exclusively the heroes of our own story. We are also the cowards, the betrayers, the envious, the cruel, the weak. If authenticity demands truth, then it demands recognition, not just of our light, but of our darkness. And this feels unbearable. Arthur Schopenhauer approached authenticity from a different, but equally unsettling angle. He saw human life as driven by the will, a blind, restless striving that churns beneath our conscious minds. According to him, much of what we do, the careers we chase, the relationships we cling to, the little social dances we perform, is not because we authentically will it, but because we are whipped forward by the tireless lash of this unconscious drive. Is it any wonder, then, that authenticity feels elusive? To ask ourselves, who am I really, is to risk discovering that much of what we thought was a free choice was, in fact, compulsion. And Nietzsche, in his fiery way, pushed the challenge further. He dared us to imagine the eternal recurrence, the possibility that we would have to live this exact life again and again, loops without end. His question, would you embrace it joyfully, wasn't meant to predict the metaphysics of the afterlife. It was a test of authenticity. If you recoil at the thought of living your life on repeat, perhaps it isn't your life you're living, but someone else's script engraved onto your skin. The roots of our fear, then, dig in multiple directions at once. Psychologically, authenticity risks uncovering the shadow. Philosophically, it risks revealing that our existence itself is a performance not of our choosing. And socially, authenticity threatens the very cohesion of the tribe. Let's slow down here, because society's role is crucial. Humans are not designed for isolation. For millennia, survival depended on acceptance within the group. To be exiled was to perish. Behind our conscious fear of rejection lurks this ancient memory. Banishment equals death. Though we now live in cities of millions, the ancestral coding persists. Every anxious pause before voicing your real opinion, every internal flinch before dressing the way you truly want, every careful self-edit on social media, that's not just insecurity, that's the ghost of survival fear. Deep down, your nervous system still equates authenticity with the risk of starvation, exposure, and predators in the dark. So while modern culture glorifies being yourself, your biology whispers, Careful. To stand too far out is to stand alone, and the alone perish. And it's not only biology. Consider Aldous Huxley, who observed in Brave New World how conformity is not just enforced by the state, but welcomed by people themselves, as though comfort is preferable to authenticity. His dystopia wasn't populated by tyrants cracking whips over rebels. It was filled with citizens eager to exchange their autonomy for security, their individuality for distraction. There is a chilling truth here. Often we sabotage our own authenticity, not because it is forbidden, but because it feels easier not to carry its weight. But what is the cost of this compromise, this surrender to safety? Jean-Paul Sartre captured it with the concept of bad faith. To live in bad faith is to avoid the burden of freedom, to convince oneself that life is only a series of roles already scripted: worker, lover, friend, citizen, so we can avoid the tormenting responsibility of inventing ourselves anew. Masks protect us from the raw anxiety of freedom, yet every time we hide behind them, authenticity slips further from reach. Notice how the roots intertwine. Our psychology resists facing the full complexity of who we are. Our biology warns of the dangers of standing out, and our culture seduces us with the security of conformity. Together, these forces form an architecture of fear, so invisible, yet so overwhelming, that most people never glimpse its shape. This is why authenticity terrifies us. It isn't just about risking other people's judgments in the present moment. It's about colliding with our own shadow, awakening to the machinery of compulsion, and challenging ancient survival codes written into our DNA. It threatens the stability of the carefully maintained fictions we call identity, status, and belonging. And yet, despite all these barriers, the yearning persists. Something deep within refuses to be stifled entirely. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on life in concentration camps, argued that meaning, not pleasure, not power, not safety, was the core of human resilience. And meaning arises only when we align with what is true, not what is convenient. In other words, authenticity. This is the tension that hunts us. Authenticity is both the most dangerous and the most meaningful pursuit of human life. It confronts us with pain, and yet promises liberation. But to step onto that path, one must first recognize the depth of the trap we're caught in. Because make no mistake, the refusal of authenticity has consequences. Consequences written not in philosophy alone, but in the very architecture of our lives. The jobs we resent but cling to, the relationships that look whole but feel hollow, the numbing distractions we consume like sugar. Aren't these the quiet symptoms of a life lived at a calculated distance from itself? The danger is not only that we fail to live authentically, but that over time, the masks we wear refuse to come off, even in solitude. That's the ultimate erasure, when we trick ourselves so thoroughly that even the private self can no longer tell costume from flesh. And it is here, balanced at the edge of terrifying recognition, that we must ask, what happens if we keep running from authenticity? What invisible wounds fester in the silence of denial? The answer lies in the next step, tracing the unseen consequences that unfold when we bury our true selves for too long. The unseen consequences. You might think the refusal of authenticity is a small matter, like choosing a polite silence over an awkward truth, or putting on a smile when you'd rather sigh. But what begins as a subtle avoidance grows into a sprawling labyrinth of consequences, twisting through the corridors of both personal and collective life. On the surface, the trade seems harmless. You fit in at work, your friends nod approvingly, your family admires how well-adjusted you are. But beneath this, something dangerous stirs, the slow erosion of self-trust. Every time you swallow your real thoughts, each time you silence an authentic impulse, you send yourself a hidden message. Who you really are is not safe. Who you really are is not allowed. Over years, those hidden messages accumulate like sediment in a riverbed, until eventually, the current of your own identity is dammed. You no longer ask yourself, what do I actually want? Instead, you ask, what is expected of me? Or, what will keep everyone happy? The terrifying truth is this: even your desires can become counterfeit. The longer you perform, the more you forget where the act ends and the self begins. This inner fracture shows up in strange ways. Consider burnout, not merely the exhaustion of long hours, but the hollow despair of realizing your efforts are devoted not to your true aspirations, but to roles assigned by circumstance, culture, or fear. Or think of the creeping sense of alienation that leaves people surrounded by friends yet somehow lonely. After all, if your companions love the mask instead of the person beneath, loneliness persists no matter how crowded the room. Cognitive psychology even gives us a vocabulary for this distortion. Cognitive dissonance describes the discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs. But there is a deeper dissonance, the one between who you are and who you pretend to be. And unlike momentary tension, this dissonance isn't fleeting. It hums constantly under the surface, draining energy, fraying patience, and breeding resentment. The mind tires of being split against itself. Neurologically, pretending exacts a toll. Studies on emotional labor, the effort of suppressing true feelings in service of a role, common in service industries, show that the constant self-monitoring activates stress responses in the brain. Cortisol levels rise, fatigue sets in. Over time, even memory and decision-making degrade. To live inauthentically isn't just spiritually taxing, it is physically corrosive. Your very biology pays the price of the mask. But the consequences extend far beyond the individual. Consider society itself. If authenticity is suppressed on a large scale, what we create collectively is not culture, but theater. People move through institutions, schools, workplaces, governments, not as full selves, but as actors performing socially approved scripts. Everything becomes staged, transactional, more about appearance than essence. Truth itself becomes diluted. This is how you arrive at a world where social media feeds brim with curated illusions, lives polished until they gleam like glassware, hiding the undertow of anxiety, boredom, and despair. Each person compares themselves to these glistening performances, not realizing the comparisons themselves are based on shadows. Reality bleeds thinner, while image swells. And what thrives in this climate are not authenticity and meaning, but envy, insecurity, and perpetual restlessness. On a societal level, this performance economy breeds mistrust. When everyone knows that everyone else is pretending, what confidence remains? Think of politics. Hollow speeches engineered for applause lines, but empty of clear truth. Think of corporate culture. Mission statements about authentic connection, while employees are punished for actually speaking candidly. Think of personal relationships cut hollow by constant scrolling, where lovers no longer confess their rawest selves to each other, but present sanitized fragments. Isn't it tragic? The more we dignify the mask, the more starved we become for something real. At its deepest, this suppression of authenticity creates a wound in what philosophers call being. Heidegger used that term to describe our fundamental way of existing in the world, not as detached observers, but as participants who crave meaning. When your life becomes strictly about roles, compliance, and masks, you are estranged from being itself. You're alive, but not living. Breathing, but not being. The unseen consequences quiet despair, the kind of despair that Soren Kierkegaard described as the sickness unto death, a state where one is physically alive yet inwardly withering, because one's truest self has been ignored or denied. Kierkegaard insisted despair does not always look like overt suffering. Sometimes it looks like a comfortable routine, a settled life, even a smile at the dinner table, all the while concealing a silent fracture, the death of authenticity. This despair becomes multi-generational. Parents pass it on unconsciously, subtly teaching their children that conformity is safer than raw truth. Don't say that, it might upset someone. That's not appropriate. Fit in, don't draw attention. These messages, though well-intentioned, plant seeds of inner division in young minds, and children grow into adults who, decades later, can't remember how to distinguish their authentic voice from the one trained to please. Thus, the cycle reinforces itself, sewing another layer of masks on humanity's tapestry. But perhaps the most treacherous consequence is how easily inauthenticity disguises itself as success. A lucrative career may be built on suppressing one's deeper passions. A marriage may endure decades on the strength of roles performed rather than intimacy shared. From the outside, these lives look complete, but from within, they carry a subtle hollowness, like a beautifully wrapped gift box that rattles when shaken because so little is inside. And maybe here is the sharpest sting. Most people sense this hollowing, yet they look away. It is easier to numb it with distraction than to acknowledge what it truly points toward. That entire patterns of life may have been built on avoidance. But there comes a moment for many, quiet or thunderous, when the consequences of inauthenticity can no longer be ignored. A crisis, a death, a betrayal, an illness, a breakup, strips away the stage lights. And suddenly the fragile mask is ripped open, forcing the question, if I have not lived as myself, have I lived at all? That question doesn't just haunt individuals, it reverberates across civilizations. Because societies built on suppression breed restlessness, they birth movements, revolutions, countercultures. Every surge of rebellion throughout history is, in some way, a desperate cry for authenticity. Think of the Romantic poets railing against industrial rigidity. Think of the 1960s counterculture rejecting stale suburban conformity. Think of modern calls for radical transparency. These rebellions echo one timeless truth. Sooner or later, the human soul revolts against its own inauthenticity. So the consequences are everywhere. In sickness of body, fracture of psyche, hollowness of relationships, mistrust of institutions, despair woven into the fabric of culture. But perhaps the darkest of all is this. The longer you avoid your authentic self, the harder it becomes to remember where that self even lives. The mask becomes flesh, the role becomes identity. And then, is there even anything left beneath to reclaim? That is the shadow we now face. And yet, there is an answer. Not an easy one, not a comforting one, but a path forged by rebels, philosophers, and visionaries who dared to discard their masks. It is time to consider rebellion, not in the streets, but in the soul. The rebellion, how to break free. Every great turning point in life begins not with a new idea, but with a defiance. Something in you finally whispers, no, shouts, enough. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a quiet recognition that you can't keep living this half-life, playing dress-up in someone else's costume. Other times it's violent, born of crisis, a heartbreak, an illness, a betrayal that tears the stage curtains down. Either way, rebellion against inauthenticity begins when you decide that fear will no longer be your compass. But rebellion must be carefully understood. It's not about screaming your truth at every passerby or flamboyantly rejecting every convention. Anyone can perform rebellion as another form of mask, a costume stitched in leather and resentment. No, the deeper rebellion is more radical. It is the refusal to betray yourself anymore, in ways both massive and microscopic. Friedrich Nietzsche called for the creation of the Übermensch, the one who invents their own values and dares to live by them, even when the herd calls them mad. While his language was fiery and misunderstood, the essence is surprisingly compassionate. The courage to live as a self-authored being, to break free of inherited scripts, not for the sake of rebellion itself, but to create a life that is yours, not society's, not traditions, not even your fears, but yours. Let us ask, what does this rebellion require? First, honesty, brutal honesty, a willingness to stand before yourself without anesthesia. This is perhaps the hardest act in the human experience, to look in the mirror and admit, I have lived much of this life as a performance. To admit it is not humiliation, but freedom. Because when you can clearly see how fear, survival, and conformity sculpted your choices, then you at last hold the chisel in your own hand. Until then, the forces sculpt you. Second, Consciousness. As Viktor Frankl discovered in The Crucible of Auschwitz, between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies freedom. Rebellion begins in that space. When your instinct says, "Hide this part of me," they won't approve. Pause. Flood that hidden chamber with light. Name the fear. In recognition lies the possibility of choice. Third, small acts of courage. Do not think rebellion requires torching your life in flames, quitting your job, severing ties, vanishing into the wilderness. Those stories inspire us but intimidate us too. The subtler rebellion is refusing the tiniest daily betrayals, saying no when every cell of you wants to say no, even if it disappoints someone. Wearing clothes you like, even if they don't fit the dress code of your social tier. Speaking an unpopular opinion, letting the silence after it hang, and realizing you survived. Each of these moments strengthens the muscles of authenticity, small rebellions growing into a revolution. Fourth, acceptance of imperfection. To rebel against inauthenticity does not mean you suddenly live in total, pristine truth at all times. That ideal itself becomes a new mask, the authentic person mask. Instead, rebellion is slow restoration, like a ruined fresco being cleaned patiently until its colors return. You will fumble. You will catch yourself pretending, conforming, self-editing reflexively. The rebellion isn't in never conforming again. It's in refusing to let the mask fuse to your skin permanently. Let us borrow inspiration from history. Consider Socrates, condemned to death not for murder or theft, but simply for living too authentically in Athens. He questioned, he challenged, he exposed hypocrisies, and in doing so, he embodied the rebel spirit. His calm acceptance of his execution revealed the ultimate expression of authenticity, to live in alignment with truth even at mortal cost. That is the rebellion's sharpest point, when truth becomes more important than survival. Or think of Rosa Parks, whose act of sitting in the wrong seat was no grand philosophical speech, but a simple refusal to betray herself any longer. Authentic rebellion doesn't need fireworks. It needs only steadiness, the quiet audacity to remain unmoved when the world demands compromise. This path also requires psychological integration. Jung's shadow won't dissolve just because you declare yourself authentic. Sometimes rebellion means embracing the parts of you you'd rather cast away, the pettiness, the envy, the anger, then weaving them into a larger, more honest whole. Rebellion is not about sculpting yourself into an angel, but accepting that you are human, vast and messy. Authenticity means wholeness, not flawlessness. And here's a paradoxical twist. True rebellion against fear of authenticity often leads not to isolation, but to deeper connection. People sense when you are unarmored, not selling a performance, not pleading for validation. Your presence itself becomes magnetic. The relationships that survive may shrink in number, but grow in quality. Those who remain are not in love with the costume. They are in love with the presence beneath. Of course, there is still loss. Some will leave, some will resent, some will mock. But rebellion is choosing to endure the loss of the conditional in order to gain the unconditional. The mask attracts crowds. Authenticity attracts kin. And isn't kinship, genuine recognition, what you've always hungered for anyway? This rebellion also requires a redefinition of success. In a world conditioned to measure worth in likes, dollars, and applause, rebellion means daring to measure success in terms like presence, congruence, inner alignment. Do I wake feeling whole? Do I speak words I believe in? Do I recognize myself in my own reflection? These are the new metrics of the rebel. And perhaps the greatest weapon of rebellion is something shockingly gentle: compassion. Compassion for yourself as you peel away old masks. Compassion for others still hiding behind theirs. Compassion transforms rebellion from bitterness into beauty. Without it, rebellion curdles into alienation. With it, rebellion becomes luminous, an invitation instead of a condemnation. When you live authentically, you are a living act of revolution. Every small moment of truth-telling defies millennia of conditioning. Every breath taken in wholeness resists a civilization built on performance. And yet, it is not enough to expose and rebel, because beyond rebellion waits something even greater, the fullest realization of authenticity's purpose. Rebellion may begin with a shattering, but it must end with a synthesis, a deeper truth that transforms not just you, but your relationship to reality itself. Now we are ready to approach the highest threshold, the ultimate realization, the paradigm shift that reframes the entire journey, the ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. There is a moment that every seeker of authenticity must face, the recognition that the goal isn't merely to rebel against masks or to peel them away one by one. That's only the prelude. The deeper question waits, burning quietly beneath all the turmoil. Once all the masks are stripped away, what remains? And here is the terrifying, liberating truth. Perhaps there is no single, fixed, authentic self hiding beneath it all. At first, this sounds like despair. Haven't we been chasing the real me, yearning to uncover the solid truth beneath performance? But consider it carefully. The belief that authenticity is some static, pre-packaged identity you must discover is itself another trap, another mask in disguise. If you go looking for the one true self, you may end up clutching another role, another rigid definition, another costume you'll suffocate in. The ultimate realization is this: authenticity is not a destination. It is a continual act of creation. Jean-Paul Sartre hinted at this when he declared, "Existence precedes essence." We are not born with a fixed essence that dictates who we are. We exist first, raw, undefined. And then, through choice, through courage, through alignment, we weave an essence. To live authentically is not to uncover a real self, fossilized beneath the rubble of performance, but to create yourself freshly, moment by moment, aligned not with fear, but with freedom. The masks, then, are not evil in themselves. They are only dangerous when mistaken for the whole. There will always be some degree of role-playing in life. You are parent in one room, employee in another, lover in another. The rebellion is not to eradicate roles, but to play them consciously, without surrendering the authorship of your being to them. Authenticity is living with the awareness, I am not this role. I am the one who chooses how to embody it. So what is the ultimate truth? It is not just be yourself. It is daring to realize the self is not something you find, it is something you free. Notice how this redefines fear. The terror at the heart of authenticity is not rejection itself, but the mistaken belief that rejection of your expression equals rejection of your entire being. Once you grasp that you are a creator, not a commodity, rejection loses its teeth. If others walk away from a version of you, so be it. You have not lost yourself because you were never a static product to begin with. You are a force, fluid and ungraspable, perpetually reborn through choice. This shift transforms authenticity into an infinite horizon. It is not about finally becoming who you are so you can rest in completion. It is about living in a state of perpetual becoming, free to continuously redefine, realign, re-emerge. That is why authenticity feels so frightening. It is bottomless because freedom is bottomless. And that is also why it is the only thing that can feel truly alive. Let's ground this in imagery. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast sea under a night sky. Your authentic self is not a locked room hidden on some island waiting to be discovered. It is the sea itself, moving, expanding, breaking into waves, retreating, reshaping. There is no end point. There is only the dance of creation, the tides of becoming. This realization can strike like lightning or like a gentle dawn. Viktor Frankl, meditating on suffering, discovered that even in a concentration camp, meaning could still be born. Not because there was a hidden, authentic Frankl self waiting behind bars, but because in each moment he had the freedom, the terrifying, sacred freedom, to choose his attitude, to choose dignity, to choose to bear suffering in alignment with purpose. Meaning, authenticity, essence. They are not given to you. They are created by you. And here, a marvelous paradox reveals itself. Once you accept that the authentic self is not fixed, the pressure lifts. You don't need to endlessly search for your true essence, as though it were a hidden relic. You need only to practice alignment, moment by moment. Choose honesty over pretense, creation over compliance, presence over absence. Suddenly, authenticity is less about perfection and more about participation. Less about unveiling a monolith of truth, more about dancing in freedom. Yet don't mistake this freedom for indulgence or chaos. Freedom cut loose from responsibility collapses into nihilism. The deeper element that anchors authenticity is responsibility. Your recognition that you are answerable to yourself for every act of creation. This responsibility is not heavy. It is holy. It is the profound honor of sculpting the essence of your life out of raw existence. When you live this way, new eyes open. You begin to see authenticity not only in yourself but in others, sometimes hidden, trembling, trying to break through their carefully crafted exteriors. And your own authenticity becomes an invitation, a permission slip for others to drop their disguises too. Thus, the ultimate truth blooms outward. Authenticity is not just a personal act. It is a relational, even civilizational act. One person's authenticity loosens the chains of everyone around them. Think of the artists, writers, visionaries whose works moved you most. Was it because their lives were flawless? Or because through their courage to reveal something raw and unedited, they reminded you of your own hidden depths? True authenticity is contagious. It spreads not by domination, but by resonance, when the music of one free soul awakens the melody of another. And so, why does authenticity terrify us? Because buried within it lies the realization that we are not who we thought we were. We are bigger, stranger, freer. And freedom in its purest form is not just exhilarating, but overwhelming. Yet to shrink from it is the slow death of despair. To embrace it is to finally participate in the raw miracle of existence. Picture this. One day, you wake and almost without effort smile at your reflection, not because it is perfect, but because it is alive. You go into the world and speak words that vibrate with congruence, knowing some will accept you and others won't. Yet the fear that once haunted you is gone, not because rejection is impossible, but because you understand, rejection no longer defines you. You are more than any mask, more than any judgment. You are the unending act of becoming. The ultimate truth is simultaneously unsettling and glorious. Authenticity is not about finding who you are. It is about courageously creating who you are, again and again, in alignment with truth rather than fear. That is why it terrifies, and that is why it saves. So the stage falls silent now. The masks dangle, irrelevant. And there you stand, not completed, not solved, but awake. You breathe, you exist, you create. And for the first time, the simplest fact of all feels extraordinary. You are here, and you are real.